Hi and welcome to CSS Grid Introduction. CSS Grid is another CSS tool or technology that allows us to lay out our items on the screen, and it allows us to create websites basically. So it's a layouting tool. Now there is one very similar idea in CSS Grid as well as CSS Flexbox, and that is the parent-child relationship. So we talked about CSS Flexbox a lot. We know that in CSS Flexbox we have a flex container and then we have a series of flex items. The same goes for a grid. Within the grid we have a grid container and then we have a series of grid items. Instead of flex, we are just going to call them grid. Now first off, let's complete our HTML and then we are going to dive into CSS and talk about CSS Grid a little bit more. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a grid container and I'm going to create a series of children within that grid container. So I'm going to say I want to create a section and I'm going to give it a class. The class is going to be container. And within this section, what do I want to create? I want to create LIs. How many? Not LIs. Let's go with divs. So I'm going to say 20 divs. And each div, I want it to have two classes. The first class is going to be item, and the second class is going to be item dash $sign. Now, I want to provide them with some content as well, and that they should say item 1 all the way to item 20. So what do we have here? So what is it going to create for us? Item, yeah. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to comment this one out. I'm going to copy it down below. I'm going to put it for your references. And when I save it, we have a section, which is the container. And then we have 20 LIs. These 20 LIs, I keep saying LIs, it's from our Flexbox lectures. So we have 20 divs. This is supposed to simulate a real world situation where you have a website and you have multiple sections within that website. So this each of these children, each of these items, they have two classes, a class of item. So we can apply shared styles on all of them at the same time. And then item 1 and 2, so we can apply individual styles for them. Let's go into CSS Grid, CSS file. First, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab all the padding, make it 0, all the margin, make it 0, and I'm going to say box sizing should be border box. Now that we are done with that, I'm going to grab the body. This is what we're going to follow, the same as we had for our Flex lectures and font family, and this is going to be universal for all of our lectures. It's going to be common. So this is the first time that I'm going to do it. I'm not going to do it again. We are basically just going to go ahead and copy paste. So I'm going to say dot item. Now this is going to grab every element that has an item class. So let's increase the font size to 20 pixels. So we can see that these are items. It means that they're actually grid items. And I'm going to say, I'm not going to provide any margin. We used to provide any margins for Flexbox, but when we studied gap, we didn't provide. I'm not going to provide any margin for these grid items. When we get to gap, we're just going to provide gap. However, I could provide some padding of 10 pixels. And I'm going to give them a background color. It's going to be rather a live and spiritful color. It's going to be E04, and then we have DBO. Save that. There we go. Let's change the color of the text to white. And let's save that. So here is our div, and here are all of our divs, and here is the section. Now, first off, let's go ahead and, yeah, cool. So first, let's talk about CSS Grid. CSS Grid layout is the actual official name, aka CSS Grid. It is a two-dimensional grid-based layout system. as opposed to Flexbox, which was one direction. This is the first difference. Flexbox is one-dimensional, Grid is two-dimensional, and this two-dimensionality nature of the grid basically removes the need to reorient the grid container. When we talked about Flexbox, what we did was we had the option to change the direction of the Flex container. So it was by default row, we could change it to column. But when you have both of the dimensions available to you, you don't really have to do the changing of direction. So we don't have any grid direction. We had flex direction. We don't have any grid direction. Now, this two-dimensionality, it also allows us to create websites better, to lay out items better, as opposed to Flexbox, in which we only could apply styles or apply elements in one straight line, whether that was vertical or horizontal. We did create multi-line containers, but the problem with those were that they weren't that much predictable. So you couldn't really say, okay, whether that's the design that you want to go with, right? Now, this CSS grid is one of the hottest features of CSS and completely changes the way we think about and create our website layouts and interfaces. Flexbox, on the other hand, is a one-dimensional layout system design. And one of the other major differences between Flexbox and Grid is that Flexbox is used to design smaller components of our website. Grid, however, is a more sophisticated method that we can leverage in order to design more dynamic and responsive website layouts that are adaptable to any screen size. Now, in the following series of lectures, we are going to talk about Grid. There's going to be a lot of lectures, I think more than 25 lectures, and we are going to cover everything there is you need to know about Grid. Everything is a need to know, and then we are going to talk about all of them. Now, there are a lot of concepts in Grid, apart from the two fundamental ones, like we have Grid container and then we have the Grid item. We also have Grid, we have the Grid column, Grid row, Grid line, cell, track, and area. Now, I'm not going to explain all of them here. I'm not going to go by their definition. When we get to those lectures, I'm going to explain what they are. For now, what I want to do right here is just go ahead and just create a grid context for our diffs. So it goes in the same way. First, we select the element that we want it to be the grid container. So I'm going to say display, and then there is going to be a property value for the display. So we talked about block, inline block, and flex. The fifth one, inline flex, which was like we had, so block, inline block, and then we had inline, and then flex, inline flex. This is the sixth one. We also have display grid. Now, here is one of the biggest differences between, one of the most visual differences between flex and grid, and that is when you specify grid, you can't really see anything change because nothing changes. I mean, why should anything change? Because it is a two-dimensional system. But with Flexbox, we saw that all of our elements, they were laid out horizontally when we just said display flex. Now, the cool thing about developer tools for Firefox is that you can see the entire layout of your website in this area, bottom right corner, as you can see right here. So this is the entire area. This entire area is called the grid area. These lines, dotted lines that are purple, I think, in color, these are grid lines. We are going to talk about all of them in our upcoming lectures. And with this grid, so we have created our very first grid. And I should congratulate you as well. But the remaining stuff that we are going to cover about grids, I have spread them out throughout different lectures, like more than 20 lectures, just to make sure that you understand. And these lectures are a little bit bite-sized, so they're easy to digest. So that's it for this lecture. See you in the next one.